What would you do if you caught a loyal employee who helped build your workplace from the ground up, eating out of the trash just to survive? Hello, wise and wonderful listeners. You who value hard work, loyalty, and justice, this story is for you. Today we uncover a hidden world behind the velvet curtains of a beloved theater, where one man's quiet suffering becomes the spark for a powerful reckoning. Stay with us, because what starts as a haunting discovery soon turns into a tale of redemption, truth, and the kind of leadership this world needs more of. The backstage corridors of the Brightmoor Performing Arts Center were silent, except for the hum of old fluorescent lights and the soft metallic clatter of a mop bucket. It was nearly 2 o'clock evening, and the final echoes of the evening rehearsal had long faded. Hidden in the shadows of the loading dock, a man in faded work clothes crouched low between two large trash bins, his silhouette barely visible beneath the amber glow of a flickering security light. Daniel Whitaker, posing as a temp stagehand named Dan, watched from a distance, frozen in place. He'd come out back to retrieve a forgotten dolly. What he saw instead would haunt him. The man was Eli Monroe, the building's janitor. 67 years old, stoop-shouldered but precise in movement, Eli looked like he was sorting tools. But he wasn't. With thin, trembling hands, he was carefully extracting scraps of discarded food, half-eaten sandwiches, untouched fruit, sealed leftovers from the actors' green room, and laying them on a piece of clean stageboard like a sad makeshift picnic. His face remained expressionless, but his eyes flicked anxiously from side to side, scanning for anyone who might catch him in this moment of humiliating survival. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He'd only been undercover a week, and already the factory-polished reports from the executive suite were unraveling. But this was something else. The theater paid fair wages, at least on paper. No one should be reduced to this. He wanted to look away, to give Eli his dignity, but his feet were rooted to the ground by a mix of disbelief, guilt, and anger. Every movement Eli made was methodical, removing crusts, wiping dirt from wrappers, setting aside bruised fruit. Not just survival, ritual. This wasn't the first time. A soft crunch under Daniel's boot startled them both. Eli spun around, eyes wide with panic. I was just cleaning up, he stammered, already pushing the food back into the trash bag. Don't report me. I'll put it all back. I was just... Daniel stepped forward slowly, palms open. It's okay, he said gently. I'm not a supervisor, just... Are you all right? Eli said nothing at first, then stood, brushing crumbs from his uniform. Fine, he said curtly, but his voice betrayed the truth. Daniel nodded solemnly, knowing this moment had changed everything. If this was happening to someone like Eli, something was deeply rotten at Brightmoor, and he would find out exactly what it was. Just 3 weeks earlier, Daniel Whitaker had stepped off the train at Granfield Station, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and uncertainty etched across his face. The city hadn't changed much since he left for London a decade ago, but Brightmoor Performing Arts Center, the place where he'd swept stages as a teenager under the mentorship of the legendary Harold Crane, felt like a relic now. Once the crown jewel of regional theater, Brightmoor had grown dusty, both in its reputation and its culture. Daniel had returned, not for prestige or paycheck, but to honor a promise. On Harold's deathbed, his mentor had clasped Daniel's hand and said, "Don't let them turn it into a brand. Keep it a place where people matter." Daniel didn't know exactly what that meant at the time, but he was starting to understand. Officially, Daniel was now the artistic director, the youngest ever appointed. Unofficially, he was an outsider. Most of the board treated him like a placeholder, an idealistic legacy pick. They wanted him to focus on gala tickets and donor dinners. But almost immediately, Daniel sensed something off. Staff seemed unusually cautious. Conversations quieted when he entered rooms. At a board luncheon, he overheard a casual joke from the facilities manager, Rick Barrow. "Some of the crew still think Harold's ghost walks the halls. I tell them the only thing haunting this place is unpaid overtime." Everyone laughed, except Daniel. That night, he wandered the building long after hours, tracing the path Harold used to walk every night, checking on crews, asking actors how they were really doing, peeking into the costume shop to compliment a stitch or a seam. Now those halls were silent. The warmth had vanished. A week later, Daniel requested access to internal employee satisfaction surveys. HR sent him a vague summary with glowing adjectives and zero data. When he pushed for specifics about complaints, turnover, and payroll errors, Claudia Nix, the head of HR, stonewalled him. "Everything's been stable," she said with a forced smile. "We're transitioning systems, but it's nothing to worry about." But Daniel was worried. When he spoke to a lighting tech in the break room, the man said something that stuck with him. "You know what's funny? We don't even know who really runs this place anymore, not since Harold passed." That was the moment Daniel decided to find out for himself. If Brightmoor was rotting from within, he wouldn't find answers in the boardroom. He'd have to go back where he started, behind the curtain, among the workers, where the soul of the theater once lived. By the following Monday, Daniel Whitaker had vanished. In his place was Dan Wilkes, a quiet, slightly clumsy new hire working the graveyard shift as a stagehand. He wore a second-hand windbreaker, scuffed work boots, and a knit beanie to cover his neatly combed hair. The transformation was startling, even to himself. With forged credentials approved through a favor from the board's tech liaison, Daniel had inserted himself into the backstage crew, under the guise of helping with the upcoming fall musical's rigging and scene transitions. Few of the overnight crew had ever seen the new artistic director in person, and those who had wouldn't have expected him to be the man stacking sandbags and wheeling set flats under moonlit rafters. He kept his head down, mimicking the stoop and steady rhythm of the more seasoned workers. There were no spotlights, no applause, just hours of hauling, painting, measuring, and staying out of the way. The air backstage was thick with sawdust, forgotten coffee cups, and tension. "Don't ask, don't talk" seemed to be the unofficial motto. The only person who spoke to him more than once was Tasha Grimes, a sharp-eyed wardrobe coordinator in her late 40s. With her piercing stare and sardonic humor, she could read people like scripts. "You're not a lifer," she said during their first smoke break, even though Daniel didn't smoke. "Hands too clean, posture too hopeful." She didn't press further, but Daniel knew he'd need to earn her silence. As the nights passed, he began to pick up the unspoken rules. Breaks were staggered not by shift policy, but by power dynamics. The aging carpenter got first dibs at the microwave. The interns knew not to sit at the corner table unless invited. When the facilities manager, Rick Barrow, made one of his late-night walkthroughs, conversations ceased. Daniel started noticing other patterns, too, like how one lighting tech grumbled about being shorted on hours again, or how a janitor quietly clocked in for someone else who hadn't shown up. On paper, everything seemed efficient, but the reality was more chaotic. Rumors buzzed through whispers, people getting docked for mistakes they didn't make, checks arriving late or short, and anyone who complained being reassigned to worse shifts or simply let go. One night, while painting backdrop flats in the dim corner of the scene shop, Daniel overheard a younger crew member mutter, "This place used to be different. Before Harold died, it felt like a family. Now it's just survival." That cut deeper than he expected. He remembered sweeping those very floors as a teen while Harold made late-night coffee for the crew. Now, everything felt colder. Daniel wasn't just seeing logistical dysfunction, he was feeling the absence of soul. And somewhere buried in this new culture of silence and fear, he knew, were the people who had buried it. He just didn't know yet how deep the rot went, or how far he'd have to go to cut it out. It was during his second week on the overnight shift that Daniel began seeing Eli Monroe not just as the quiet janitor, but as a mystery waiting to be understood. Eli moved through the corridors like a ghost, unnoticed, uninterrupted, but always precise. He polished the same brass stair rails every night, swept beneath every riser, wiped down dressing room mirrors even when no one had used them. It wasn't just duty, it was reverence. He treated the building like a sacred space. And yet Daniel noticed how the other staff seemed to look past him, as if he were part of the furniture, not a man with 4 decades of history etched into the walls. Daniel made his move one night in the paint shop where Eli was quietly organizing brushes no one had touched in weeks. "Extra sandwich?" Daniel offered, holding out a wrapped turkey and cheese on sourdough. "My wife overpacks. Want it?" It was a lie. Daniel wasn't married. But it gave Eli a way to accept without feeling pitied. Eli hesitated for a moment, then nodded and took it gently, as if handling a prop from a Shakespeare play. "Thoughtful woman you got," he said. "Tell her thank you." That small exchange opened the door. Over the next few nights, Daniel lingered near Eli during breaks, making conversation feel like coincidence. He asked how long Eli had worked there. "Since Harold opened the place," Eli replied. "Helped build the original catwalks. Used to be a set designer back when everything was done by hand." His eyes grew distant for a moment. "But I took a fall, couldn't climb ladders after that. So I clean now. Pays the rent." Except it didn't. When Daniel gently asked why Eli had been rummaging through trash for meals, the older man stiffened, pride flaring behind his weathered features. "It ain't about the money," Eli said. "It's about the money never arriving." He hadn't seen a proper paycheck in 3 months. HR blamed software. Rick, the facilities manager, told him to stop making trouble. He said, "If I can't handle the stress, maybe I should consider retiring." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. Eli had built this place, literally, and now he was eating leftovers and apologizing for existing. Worse, no one seemed to care. No one even noticed. That's when Daniel realized this wasn't just mismanagement, it was exploitation. And Eli, the most loyal man in the building, had become its quietest victim. The more Daniel dug, the worse it got. What started as a gut instinct had evolved into a growing file of anomalies, inconsistencies, and gut-wrenching testimony. Every night, after his shift ended, he returned to a small rented apartment 5 blocks away, not to sleep, but to organize notes, transcribe conversations, and cross-check department rosters against payroll data. The deeper he went, the more disturbing the patterns became. Workers marked as paid who never received direct deposits, overtime requests that vanished mid-softway, and oddly frequent maintenance expenses being billed to non-existent vendors. None of this was visible in public reports. On paper, Brightmore was still solvent, but Daniel now saw the cracks beneath the stage. To make sense of the technical side, Daniel confided in Riley Tran, a quiet but sharp IT intern who maintained the center's scheduling software and back-end access logs. Under the guise of tech troubleshooting, Daniel asked about user activity within the payroll and accounting systems. Riley hesitated, loyal to her job but deeply uneasy about what she'd already suspected. "I've seen weird things," she whispered one night during a break. "Logins that vanish, admin credentials created and deleted at 2:00 a.m. every Friday, and someone's been altering payment records from the facilities department's side. I keep backups, though, just in case." Together they uncovered a damning timeline. Payments to 2 supposed third-party maintenance vendors, Kessler Solutions and Westfield Support, had surged over the past 6 months, far outpacing any actual service activity. Riley pulled security camera footage. In hours when thousands of dollars were being billed for emergency restoration, the only people present were janitors like Eli, working alone. When Daniel cross-referenced the contractor details, both companies traced back to P.O. boxes and Shell LLCs in Delaware. Classic laundering fronts. Someone inside was embezzling. But the danger wasn't just digital. Word had started to spread. Tasha Grimes, who had watched Daniel closely since day one, cornered him backstage after a set move. "You're not just here to learn how the lift system works," she said flatly. "You've been watching everything, asking questions, talking to people nobody else talks to. You're in danger." Daniel didn't deny it. Instead, he asked what she knew. Tasha exhaled slowly, as if deciding whether to jump into a fire. "Rick Barrow and Claudia Nix? They're not just incompetent. They're malicious. People who challenge them disappear. Restructured out. Ask anyone who used to complain about payroll. You won't find them here anymore. That night, Daniel received a text from an unknown number. Stop asking questions. Final warning. He stared at it for a long moment before deleting it. Fear buzzed in his veins, but so did fury. He thought of Eli, of Riley, of the dozens of workers who were too scared or too beaten down to fight. This wasn't just about saving a theater. It was about justice, for people who'd given their lives to something bigger, only to be left behind in the dark. The breaking point came on a rainy Wednesday just before dawn. The air inside Brightmoor hung heavy with humidity and the scent of old paint, but something else had shifted. Something colder. Daniel arrived to find Eli in the prop storage room, silently organizing a box of antique candlesticks meant for the next show. His hands moved mechanically, but his shoulders sagged lower than usual, and his movements lacked their usual care. Daniel sensed the change immediately. "What happened?" he asked gently. Eli didn't look up. "Got called in early," he muttered. "Rick says there's restructuring and maintenance. Some of us are getting our hours cut." His voice cracked, barely audible. "Guess I'm one of the lucky ones. I get to stay. Just with less." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. Eli wasn't just losing income. He was losing the last remnants of dignity he had left in this place. For a man who had given over 4 decades to the theater, who still polished brass railings at 2 a.m. out of respect, this was more than a demotion. It was an erasure. A slow exile dressed as budget adjustments. "I'll manage," Eli said, trying to steady his voice. "Always have." But Daniel could see the cracks now. The defiance in Eli's spine was still there, but it was propping up a man being hollowed out by years of silent mistreatment. That day, Daniel didn't go straight home after his shift. He walked the perimeter of the theater alone in the drizzle, the same path Harold Crane used to take after the final curtain. The sidewalk shimmered with puddles and faded paint from a decades-old mural. He looked up at the marquee, still advertising the upcoming show, and knew that what the audience would see was only half the truth. Behind that curtain, beneath that stage, people like Eli were breaking quietly, invisibly. Daniel stopped under the old scaffolding and pulled out his phone. He texted Riley and Gregory, "We move now. I'm done watching this place fall apart." This wasn't just about exposure anymore. It was about restoration of a man, of a legacy, and of a community that deserved far better than the shadows they'd been forced to work in. The trap was set. 2 days after Eli's demotion, Brightmoor's staff was summoned to an emergency maintenance restructuring meeting in Conference Room B. The email came from Claudia Nix, laced with corporate lingo about streamlining operations and transitioning to a hybrid vendor model. The meeting was mandatory for all overnight custodial and support staff. Word spread fast. Anyone not in attendance risked being replaced. But what they didn't know was that behind the scenes, Daniel had finally gone from observer to avenger. That morning, Daniel accessed the system using credentials authorized by board member Gregory Stone and uploaded a false but plausible financial audit report to the internal management server. The memo warned of irregularities in facilities contractor payments and cited an impending external investigation. Claudia and Rick received the alert just 30 minutes before the meeting. Hidden hallway cameras caught Claudia pacing her office, frantically shredding papers, while Rick furiously deleted files from his desktop. Riley, quietly monitoring from the IT department, texted Daniel, "They're panicking. They're accessing offshore transfers again. It's happening." Daniel arrived late to the meeting on purpose. He stood just outside the room, watching through the narrow window as Claudia and Rick distributed contracts and NDAs under the guise of updated employment terms. Workers, mostly janitors, including Ellie, sat stiffly in plastic chairs, eyes wary. Ellie glanced down at the paper in his hands, jaw tightening. He hadn't signed yet. Daniel stepped into the room, no longer Dan the stagehand, but Daniel Whitaker, artistic director. He wore a dark blazer, his voice clear and unshaken. "I wouldn't sign that if I were you," he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. The silence cracked. Every head turned toward him. Claudia's smile faltered. Rick's eyes narrowed. "This is a private meeting," Rick snapped. "Return to your office." "I don't take orders from you," Daniel interrupted calmly. "I run this theater. And as of this morning, I've frozen all financial activity linked to the facilities and HR departments." He held up a folder thick with documents. "These contain evidence of embezzlement, payroll fraud, and coordinated efforts to silence and exploit staff, especially those least likely to fight back." Gasps rippled across the room. Eli, stunned, stared at Daniel with wide eyes. Two uniformed officers entered behind him, along with Gregory and Eleanor Simmons, Brightmoor's legal counsel. "Miss Nix, Mr. Barrow, you are under investigation for financial misconduct. Please come with us." Rick tried to lunge for the door, but security blocked his path. Claudia, frozen, made one last effort to reset her tablet, until Riley, arriving late, snatched it from her hands. Daniel turned to Eli. "This man hasn't been paid in 3 months. He helped build this place. And you left him to rot." His voice broke slightly. "Not anymore." Eli slowly rose from his chair, the unsigned contract falling to the floor. And for the first time in years, everyone in that room saw him. The next day, all performances were canceled. For the first time in Brightmoor's history, every rehearsal, lighting cue, and costume fitting was paused. Not for a storm or a scandal, but for a reckoning. A center-weight meeting was called at noon, and nearly every employee from understudies to janitors crowded into the main auditorium. The house lights stayed up. The stage, for once, wasn't dressed in illusion. It was real, raw, and wide open. Daniel stood at center stage, microphone in hand, but not wearing a suit. He wore a plain black shirt, rolled sleeves, and the same boots he had used during his undercover shift. His voice didn't boom, it carried. 3 weeks ago, I walked these halls pretending to be someone else, because I couldn't trust what the reports were telling me, he began. What I found broke my heart, and it should break yours too. He went on to describe the exploitation, the fraud, the betrayal of trust, not in corporate terms, but in names and faces. Eli Monroe, Riley Tran, dozens of support staff who had been silenced, docked, or discarded. As Daniel spoke, a slideshow behind him displayed falsified vendor records, bank transfers, and the names of every employee who had been underpaid, followed by the amount they were owed. Gasps. Whispers. A few muffled sobs. "Everyone on that list will receive full back pay with interest by the end of the week," Daniel continued. "No contracts, no red tape, just what you earned plus what you were denied." He paused, then his tone softened. "I also owe all of you an apology. I thought being artistic director meant choosing productions and shaking donor hands. But this place, this community, needs leadership that walks with its people, not above them. I failed to see that at first, but I won't fail again." Then he turned to the front row. Eli Monroe gave 43 years to this theater. Not once did he ask for recognition, but today, he's getting it. Daniel invited Eli to the stage. The auditorium rose to their feet. Eli walked slowly, stunned, then stood beside Daniel as the applause roared like opening night. "Effective immediately," Daniel announced, "Eli Monroe is being appointed as our employee ombudsman. He will report directly to me, and every concern you have will go through him, with no interference from any department." Eli nodded once, his eyes glassy, and whispered, "Thank you." But at that moment, no further words were needed. The ovation said it all. 2 nights later, the theater was quiet again. No music, no spotlights, just the soft creak of floorboards and the hum of stage lights set to their lowest glow. Daniel stood alone on the main stage, hands in his pockets, staring out at the empty seats. It was the same place he'd once swept as a teenager, the same place where he had discovered who he wanted to become. But now, it felt entirely new. The air no longer held the weight of silence. It hummed with promise. Footsteps echoed behind him. Eli Monroe entered from stage right, not in his usual uniform, but in a clean button-down and navy blazer. A silver pin on his lapel read Brightmoor Employee Advocate. He carried a clipboard under one arm, but stopped when he saw Daniel. "Didn't think I'd see the day you'd be brooding on stage without a script," Eli said with a wry smile. Daniel chuckled softly. "I figured it was your turn for the spotlight." Eli looked around the theater, then up at the rafters. "Never thought I'd be back up here. Not like this." He paused. "You know, Harold would be proud. Not because of the arrests, because he remembered what this place was meant to be." Daniel nodded. "He taught me that theater reveals truth, not just with actors, but with action." He turned to Eli. "Thanks for not giving up, even when no one saw you." Eli looked at him, emotion flickering across his face. "We don't work for applause. We work so the next generation doesn't have to fight for dignity." As they stood under the warm house lights, the stage felt sacred again. No curtain fell, but something deeper had closed. A chapter of silence. And something better had begun. The story of Brightmoor Performing Arts Center reminds us that leadership isn't about titles, offices, or prestige. It's about responsibility, empathy, and the courage to see the unseen. Daniel Whitaker could have remained in the comfort of his executive suite, but instead he chose to step into the shadows to uncover the truth. What he discovered wasn't just financial fraud, but the slow erosion of dignity among the very people who kept the institution alive. Eli Monroe's quiet suffering symbolizes the countless overlooked workers in every industry, loyal, capable, and invisible, until someone chooses to care. His story teaches us that no contribution is too small to matter, and no person should be forced to sacrifice their dignity for a paycheck. The real power of this story lies in its call to action, to lead with integrity, to protect the vulnerable, and to restore justice when systems fail. It challenges all of us, especially those in positions of influence, to ask, who have we stopped seeing? Because sometimes the most important change begins when we simply choose to look and refuse to look away.